Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Shaw here, ready to go to finish up all 27 amendments. This time, we're going to talk about the 20th through the 27th amendments. And guys, it's been quite a journey with you. Thank you for coming along with me. But we're not done yet. Let's go ahead and get right to it. All right, so I talked about the 20th Amendment in class because that was actually included in our last quiz. So I'm sorry about that. Again, I do want you to go ahead and get this down in your notes because, again, it is going to be on the test, and obviously it's just important to know anyway because it's in our Constitution. So what this does is that it sets dates for when the federal government offices end. So specifically, the idea was in the because of the Great Depression, Herbert Hoover was not really doing anything about the Great Depression, even though he had lost the 1932 election. So he was just in office until for another 4 months after he lost the election. So this amendment was very quickly ratified because it basically cut that 4 month time frame down into 2 months. So now, instead of being inaugurated on March 20th, now the president is going to be inaugurated on January 20th at noon. And that's, again, the president and the vice president. The Senate and the House of Representatives are going to be inaugurated at noon on the 3rd of January. And then Congress will first assemble on the third day of January at noon. So again, not super worried about you knowing about the Congress part of that, about the Senate and the House. But again, just keep the presidency in mind, and you should be fine. But anyway, then actually what happens is the Senate and the House get together, and what they do is they count the electoral votes from the election, and then they certify the election. That's like the first thing, their first act as a Congress with what they do. Anyway, so again, January 20th Amendment, a nice, easy way to remember that. Okay, so the 21st Amendment was also ratified in 1933, and again, this is the very famous, the only one of the only amendments to ever be repealed is the 18th Amendment. Again, I've talked a lot about the 18th Amendment a lot already, but what I want you to know is that just in general here, during the Great Depression, people were already struggling, and I think that a lot of people kind of thought that this was going to be one way to kind of ease that suffering a little bit, was by allowing people to have alcohol again. So again, the easiest way to remember this one, guys, is that, again, at 18, you cannot legally drink, okay, so that's prohibition. And then at 21, you can legally drink, so that is the end of prohibition, and they just repealing the 18th Amendment. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. Okay, next up is the 22nd Amendment. Okay, and so what this does is it limits the president to only 2 4-year terms or 10 years total. So ever since George Washington, was the first president, every president after him only served 2 terms because he set the precedent that presidents only serve 2 terms in office, 8 years, and then they're done. So, and then FDR comes around, and then he actually gets elected. When his 8 years are over, America is in the middle of of a really they're not middle of it. They're about to be in a big crisis with with World War II. So he decides to run for re-election again, and because again, there's no law against it. So he gets re-elected because he's a very popular president. And then again, now flash forward 4 years later, now we are getting kind of towards the end of World War II. But again, he runs one more time, and he gets elected to his 4th term. But again, he dies very early in office in that 4th term. So regardless, though, they pass the 22nd Amendment again because that's not now the president is going to be limited to 2 4-year terms or 10 years total. And I'll talk more about what that 10 years thing means in class. Okay, the 23rd Amendment was ratified in 1961, and it basically, what you need to understand is that the District of Columbia, Washington D.C., it doesn't reside in a state, so it's literally on the border between Virginia and Maryland. So what's interesting about that is that the way that presidents are elected is by states. So Washington, D.C., while existing, for, almost 200 years, or maybe 175 years at this point, they had never been able to vote for president. So this was a really weird, kind of a weird, oversight on the part of some of the early Americans. And so anyway, it's finally rectified in 1961, and this gives the District of Columbia 3 electoral votes. So again, it basically allows them to vote for the president and vice president, just as other Americans do. And again, there's a lot of other things with D.C. Like, for example, D.C. is not a state, so it doesn't have any representation in the Senate, even though the District of Columbia actually has a higher population than states like Wyoming and North Dakota and things like that. So again, just interesting things that are, I don't know, that I know about, and I wanted to tell you. So that's all. Now you know. Okay. 24th Amendment is really, really important because, again, this is passed in 1964, and again, this is about, give or take, about 100 years after the Civil War was over, about 90 years or so after, Reconstruction had ended, and and people, or really states across the Union, but mostly in the South, had been limiting the rights of African Americans. So several states, again, especially in the South, as I said, but really all over, had poll taxes to prevent African Americans from voting. Again, African Americans as a population were poorer than the remainder of the population because they had been enslaved for 300 or 400 years at this point. So it was much more difficult for them to, pay for things like poll taxes. So, and again, the poll taxes, though, were designed specifically to keep them from voting. So anyway, the 24th Amendment seeks to kind of rectify this by outlawing poll taxes in national elections. So no poll taxes can be used in any national elections. And then 2 years later, the Supreme Court is going to rule that poll taxes are actually illegal in state elections as well. Okay, so that's really important to know that now poll taxes can be used in 0 elections. Okay, and that cannot no longer be used to kind of impede anyone, but especially minorities, from voting. Okay, so 25th Amendment is in 1967. Again, unfortunately, in 1963, JFK was assassinated, and this kind of brings to light the issue of we're not exact. Every time a president has died, the vice president has taken over because that's what's in the Constitution. But they don't talk about in the Constitution what happens if the vice president dies. So again, this amendment is designed to help kind of solidify that and kind of make sure that there's always going to be really good leadership, in our in our government or in our presidential role. So again, you can think 25 and alive it's presidential succession. Again, it's filling vacancies for the vice president and responding to presidential disabilities. So if and one thing to add, I would add that the line of succession goes vice president, then the Speaker of the House, and then the President pro tempore of the Senate. Okay, and then the cabinet positions, and I'll talk about that more in class. But that is what the actual line of succession looks like. So again, if the president can't, is either dies or is incapacitated or can't do his job, then that would mean that the vice president would take over. If the vice president is incapacitated or dies or can't do his job, okay, or his or her job, that would mean that the Speaker of the House would take over. Again, this is a really controversial amendment, too, because, again, technically the Speaker of the House, think about Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi was elected by about 800,000 people in California. And now, all of a sudden, if, the president and vice president die, she would now become, the most powerful person in the country. Okay, which, again, and Nancy Pelosi is she's been a politician for a very long time. And so she's probably more than capable of doing it, but it's just kind of a weird, election thing now. She only really represents 800,000 people, and now, boom, she'd be representing, 300 million people in all of America. So anyway, and again, this was in response to JFK's assassination in 1963, as I mentioned. All right, the 26th Amendment. Sorry, let me get this out of here. There you go. Okay, the 26th Amendment, it basically says that if you're 18 and older, you can vote in national and state elections. And so the age used to be 21. So now the problem is that in Vietnam, the draft age was 18. So people who were 18, 19, and 20 were getting drafted into Vietnam to fight in the war, okay, by a president that they did not get to vote for. Okay, so this is, or by a, a government that they didn't have any say in. So this is really problematic. Okay, and they did not want. This is one of the fastest amendments ever ratified because this was a huge, just. I mean, really a violation of rights. Just because, again, if you're going to be old enough to fight and die in a war, you want to make sure that you have that right to vote, for the people that are sending you over to, to fight and die in the war. So now 18, 19, and 20-year-olds can vote, in addition to everybody who is 21 and older. Last one, we made it. The 27th Amendment was ratified in 1992. Ironically, this was one of the original ones that was proposed with the original Bill of Rights back in like right around 1790. Anyway, this one is that pay raises or decreases for members of Congress cannot take effect until after the next after the next session, or after the next election. So, like, if you get a pay raise, or they authorize a pay raise, that pay raise will take place after the next election takes place. So that, again, basically, congressmen cannot give themselves raises. That would be kind of a dangerous thing to do, and they would just basically, probably just give raises to themselves all the time. So, anyway, guys, that's it. We made it. I'm proud of you. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.